Hi, and welcome to the video on domain and range. Here we're asked to find the domain and range of f of x equals x squared and y equals the square root of x minus 1. So let's take a look at f of x equals x squared. Let's consider the graph. The graph of y equals x squared is a parabola. We can see that for the domain we're asked what are the possible values x can take. We can see in the graph that there is no restriction on x, which means that the domain is all real x. In set notation, we say that it's from negative infinity to infinity. That's inside some curved brackets. When we consider the range, however, we can see from our graph that there are no negative values there. They start at 0 and go up to infinity. You can see that from the arrows. This means that y has to be greater than or equal to 0, or in set notation, because we have a beginning, we need a square bracket followed by a 0 to infinity and then a curved bracket. But we don't actually need a graph to work out the domain and range. We can ask ourselves, what are all the possible values for x in y equals x squared? Because again, there is no restriction on x. X can be negative, it can be 0, it can be positive. We say that the domain is all real x. And we should get used to the set notation. When we consider y, however, y is x squared. This means that y has to be a positive number, because even when you put a negative x into this equation, you will still end up with a positive answer, which will be y. This means that the range will have to be greater than or equal to 0. Again, in set notation, start yourself with a square bracket because you have a beginning of 0 and goes all the way up to infinity. Let's take a look at y equals the square root of x minus 1. Now, we ask ourselves, what are the possible restrictions on x in this equation? Now, when we have a square root, it's important that you don't get negative square roots. So we ask ourselves, what does x have to be so that it's not a negative answer? Well, we can work that out with an equation. Because square roots have to be greater than or equal to 0, we can see that our x minus 1 has to be greater than or equal to 0. This means that the domain, the restriction on the domain, will be x has to be greater than or equal to 1. It can be anything as long as it is bigger than 1 or equal to. Which means that our domain is x is greater than or equal to 1. In set notation, there is a beginning, which is 1, and it goes all the way up to infinity. For the range, we have to again ask ourselves, what are the restrictions on y? Well, the answer is a square root, and square roots can't be negative. This means that our y has to be greater than or equal to 0. So we did that without having to draw a graph. That is a very useful skill to have when you take yourself into these questions. To finish off, we're going to write the range in set notation, which is from 0 all the way up to infinity. Good luck with your questions on domain and range.